Hi, it's Maya here, and look, I have a tripod. I rescued it from the trash and it seems to function okay, even though my tiny little webcam looks a bit ridiculous sitting on the top of it. But anyway, what am I gonna do? A bookshelf tour, of course. I'm going to be filming this in parts because I don't want to just list all the titles and show you the covers of the books. I want to tell you a little bit about the books, or at least about the ones that I really like. So I just decided right away that I'm going to be filming this in parts, and this is the first part. Let's get to it. So as you can see, my first shelf is a bit high for the tripod, so I'm going to be taking those books down and showing you them on a lower shelf. And the second shelf is all the books that I have not read yet, so I'm going to be skipping that shelf completely. I might do a video about that shelf later, but if you want to see some of the books that I own and haven't yet read, I have one that I've done quite a while ago already, and I will link it down below. Okay, so let's move downwards. So here's the third shelf, but before talking about these books, I'm going to show you the ones that were on that high first shelf. So at the top of the shelf, I have this Roxas figure from Kingdom Hearts 2. He's not my favorite character, but I really like his character design and the colors of his outfit, so that's why I have that figure. And then there's a little catbuck keychain from Bravest Warriors. So the first shelf I have is my Jim Butcher shelf. This is the Codex Alera series, and these are actually my boyfriend's books, and I haven't read them yet. And they are Furies of Calderon, Academ's Fury, Cursa's Fury, Captain's Fury, Princeps Fury, and First Lord's Fury. Let's just move on from these because, as I said, I haven't read them. So the things that I've actually read from my Butcher shelf are the Dresden Files series. These are the original UK covers, which I highly prefer, before they changed the cover design completely to look more like the US one. These are Stormfront, Full Moon, Grave Peril, Summer Night, Death Masks, and Blood Rites. This series gets progressively better as it goes on, and I wasn't a big fan of the first book, but later on I got caught up in the series. Then the next 5 books in the series are Deadbeat, Proven Guilty, White Knight, Small Favor, and Turncoat. Deadbeat is my favorite of the series, it's the one with the zombies. And this is up to book 10, and I actually don't own any of the other books. At first I stopped buying them because they changed the cover design and I really preferred this one, and it annoyed me. But then it turned out that I didn't like the following books as much as I like these, so I don't own any of them from Changes onwards. But I've been reading them from the library. And then one more book from that shelf, which is Side Jobs Stories from the Dresden Files, and these are short stories that Jim Butcher has written during the years. They take place during different times between different novels. This is actually a good example of what the new covers look like, which I find to be more generic, even though I like the typeface. So that was the first shelf, my Jim Butcher shelf, and we skipped my TBR shelf and moved on to this one. And this is my Neil Gaiman and Rice and Regency Fancy or Fancy of Manners shelf. So quite a mix of things, but they just fit here. First we have Stardust by Neil Gaiman, the edition that was illustrated by Charles Vess. And I bought this when I was in London when I was 16. I'm highly due for a reread. I like the book and I like the movie adaptation as well. And this book is actually signed. Then we have a couple of Neil Gaiman's children's picture books illustrated by Dave McKean. And these are The Day I Swapped My Dad for Two Goldfish and The Wolves in the Walls. These are a lot of fun, especially The Wolves in the Walls. Then we have a couple of Gaiman's Sandman books. We have The Dream Hunters, illustrated by Yoshitaka Amano, and The Season of Mists, which is one of my favorite volumes of Sandman, although I do really like Brief Lives and Kindly Ones as well. This is his signature on the Dream Hunters. And The Season of Mists is also signed. Then we have The Sleeper and the Spindle, which is illustrated by Chris Riddle. Gaiman always finds the best illustrators for his works. This is a fairy tale story mixing the stories of Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The title and the roses and thorns are on the see-through foil cover, and the real cover is just the black and white illustration. Then time for the first Anne Rice book. This is The Interview with the Vampire, the first book in the Vampire Chronicles, and one of my favorite books. Now you might see that on this shelf the Gaiman and Anne Rice books are just sort of mixed together, because I'm very weird that way that I don't like if the heights of the books change a lot. So I just want the tall books on one end and the shorter books in the middle. Then we have Gaiman's Anansi Boys, a sort of sequel to The American Gods. I say sort of sequel because it does take place in the same universe, but it's quite different in tone. And then we have the newer work of his, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. And this I didn't care for that much, but I still have it because I want to reread it before deciding if I want to get rid of it or not. Then we have more children's books by Neil Gaiman. First there's Coraline in a cheap paperback edition. I'd really want to buy the one with the Dave McKean illustrations. And then we have The Really Small Odd and the Frost Giants, which is a story with Norse gods in it. Then the last of the Gaiman books, first American Gods, and I have to say I wasn't a big fan of this book. Like The Ocean at the End of the Lane, I want to reread it before I decide if I want to keep it or not. And then there's Smoke and Mirrors, which is a short story collection. And then one of my favorite books, and my favorite book from Gaiman, Neverwhere. I read this when I was in junior high, I believe, and this was the first time I read urban fantasy and I absolutely loved it. Marquis de Carabas is my favorite. And then we have Good Omens, the collaboration between Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I also listened to the recent BBC radio adaptation of Good Omens, and I really liked it. I would highly recommend it. And then we have the rest of the Anne Rice books that I own. We have The Vampire Lestat, the second book in the Vampire Chronicles, and The Queen of the Damned, the third book in the Chronicles, with a horrendous cover. I'd like to say that I don't even know who this character is supposed to be, but sadly I do know who it's supposed to be, and it's supposed to be the Egyptian vampire queen, Akasha. I found this in a thrift store in high school and I really want to buy a nicer edition. Then we have the first book in the Mayfair Witches series, and it's The Witching Hour. I found this book to be really creepy at places and I liked some parts of it, so I'm keeping it, even though I really didn't like the second book in the series, so I never continued with it. And now we're on to the Regency fancy books. First, The Shades of Milk and Honey by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is the first book in the Glamorous History series. I also read the second and third book and I find them to be a lot of fun. I found out later that after this edition some changes were made, and in some of the later editions, I think it's in the UK edition at least, the ending has been fleshed out a bit or something, because when she wrote this one she didn't know she was starting a series. So this is another one of those books that I need to reread, even though I need to reread a different edition in this case. And finally my Susanna Clarke books. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which you may know is one of my favorite books of all time, and The Ladies of Gray's Adieu, which is a short story collection, with at least some of the stories taking place in the same universe as Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I can't quite remember if all of them take place there, but the stories are really charming, and both the books are beautiful. So that was it for the third shelf. And then we're on to the fourth shelf, and I think the final shelf for this part. And this is my young adult and various other books that didn't fit elsewhere. In the corner there we have a figure of the mayor from The Nightmare Before Christmas, which is one of my favorite films. First we have All These Things I've Done by Gabrielle Zevin, and I think this is the first book in the Birthright series, I believe, even though I've only read this one. I bought this because it was recommended by Misty from the Book Rat, and I really enjoyed it because I like the main character. She's an heir to this crime family in a world where chocolate is banned. So they're basically a crime family that sells chocolate. And then we have the Curse Workers Trilogy by Holly Black. Holly Black is my favorite young adult writer, and I will read anything that she writes. Here we have White Cat, Red Glove and Black Heart. White Cat was my favorite one from this series. Even though I could guess a lot of the plot twists that didn't for some reason bother me at all, I just really enjoyed reading it. Then we have The Coldest Girl in Cold Town, Holly Black's vampire book, and Dull Bones, which is Black's middle grade book. I'm not that fond of Dull Bones. It's another one that I want to reread before deciding if I want to keep it or not. Then we have the Unaddressed in Blood duology by Kendara Blake with Unaddressed in Blood and Girl of Nightmares, which I also bought because Misty from the Book Rat recommended it. And this is a sort of horror YA book about a ghost called Anna and a ghost hunter. I like the first book even though there was some pretty dodgy finish in it, but I think the second book was kind of forgettable, judging from the fact that I don't remember much about it. Then we have Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which was entertaining, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be rereading it. It was fun while it lasted. Then we move on to the random other books that are on this shelf. The first two being books by Caitlin R. Kiernan. And these are sort of dark fantasy, new weird, kinda horror fantasy books. And the first is Alabaster, which is a short story collection about a character called Dancy Flammarion, who is a little albino girl who goes around killing monsters because angels told her to. This is the first book that I read from Kiernan. I picked it up because it has illustrations by one of my favorite illustrators, Ted Nafee, and I'm really glad I did because I really liked it. And then we have Threshold, which is Caitlin R. Kiernan's second novel. I picked that one up because it also features Dancy Flammarion, and I really enjoyed it. I know some people don't mesh very well with Caitlin R. Kiernan's early writing style, but I do like it. And finally we have the Parasol Protectorate box set by Gail Carricker with Soulless, Changeless, Blameless, Heartless and Timeless, And these are very fun and entertaining urban fantasy steampunk mixes with werewolves and vampires taking place in Victorian London. And like I said, I find these really entertaining, and there are a lot of great characters in these, especially the beta werewolf, Professor Lyle, and the hatmaker and inventor, Madame LeFou, and Lord Akaldama, a very fancy vampire. So like I said, I'm stopping here for now. I'm not quite sure when I'll be filming the rest of the parts, but they are coming, trust me. Hope to see you later.